Good morning, everybody. My name's Tyler Watson. I'm the Executive Vice President of Marketing here at The Atlantic, and we're excited to welcome everybody to Atlantic Reads. I want to thank Politics and Prose, the official bookseller of the Atlantic Festival, for hosting this exciting conversation. Today's best-selling author, Liane Moriarty, will discuss the release of her new book, Here One Moment. The novel, set on board a seemingly ordinary domestic flight, explores free will, destiny, and our innate need for certainty in an uncertain world. Please silence your cell phones, but don't put them away. If you see or hear anything that compels you, please share on social and use the hashtag TAF24. Liane will be signing copies of Here One Moment here at Politics and Prose immediately following the conversation. And now please welcome Liane. Leading the conversation is Atlantic staff writer Shirley Li.
Thank you, Tyler. Liane, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
So, as Tyler mentioned, your new novel, Here One Moment, starts off with a group of passengers boarding a seemingly ordinary flight. There's a newlywed couple who are still in their wedding outfits, an overwhelmed mother traveling with her children. There's the empty nesters who just went on, this long-awaited trip, and a lady who gets up in the middle of the flight and tells everyone when and how they will die. This book is sprawling. You cover many characters' perspectives, but I'd say it is about two things in particular. Death, and the question of whether we have any free will over our lives. Those are things, I don't know about you, I find it hard to think about those topics, but Liane, what made you think about them?
So I was on a flight myself, coming out of Tasmania, which is the little island state at the bottom of Australia, which often gets left off the maps, and all the Tasmanians get very cranky about that. And I just spent a week's riding, and so when I spend time on my own, I find after a few days I turn into my mother. So I go into shops and I start talking to people. And so I can remember on that trip I'd bought some earrings, and I was buying the earrings for myself, but I told a whole story about how I was buying them for my sister, just so that I could keep chatting. And my sister, who's a lawyer, said I was contractually obliged to give her the earrings, which I did not. But that was my state of mind. I'd sort of turned inward. And so I was on this flight that was stuck on the tarmac, just like in the book, and I had no book that's important to the story. So I was listening into conversations as people made phone calls to, cancel dinner reservations and that sort of thing. And one woman was calling her daughter, who was obviously a little girl, and she was saying, "So, Chelsea, you're going to have to wake up Daddy, and Daddy will have to make dinner tonight." And then she was saying, "So wake him up. It's okay, just wake him up. No, just wake him up." And it went on, and I started to think, I think Daddy might be dead. And so I was texting my husband, and he was saying, "No, he's fine. He's just having a nap." And so then I swapped over to the mum and sisters group chat because I knew they'd be more interested, which they were. They were very worried about Chelsea. And sadly, or sort of happily really, my husband was right. She finally got him to wake up. But he'd obviously had too much to drink, and it was clearly not the first time this had happened. And the woman wanted to talk about it, so she wanted to talk to the person sitting next to her. But she was not interested, so I was really annoyed because I was interested. And if I had sat next to her, I would have heard the whole story, and this book would never have been written. So the plane went silent again, and so by now my thoughts had turned to death, and I was looking around at all the passengers around me, and I was thinking, so every single person on this plane is going to one day die. And looking back, it's probably not surprising that it was a time in my life that I was thinking about my own mortality. So in the preceding years, a few things had happened. First of all, my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. Then I lost my dad. Then we had the pandemic. And then I myself was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so my sister and I are both fine now, but it was definitely a time when I was thinking about mortality. Also, I think just being in my 50s, I think is a time when you start to think about that. I read recently that the time between your 40s and your 60s, they call it Sniper's Alley, because that's the time when you're likely to get one of multiple common diagnoses. I did have somebody at a recent event where I said that, and she came up in the signing line and got me to write "Welcome to Sniper's Alley" in the. So that was my frame of mind. So I was looking around at the passengers and I was thinking, so will you be the person who makes it to 100? Will you be the person whose life is unexpectedly cut short? And then it occurred to me that in 100 years or so, that information would be available, as in somebody would be able to look at the names of the passengers on the flight and name an age of death and a cause of death. So those were facts. It's just that those facts weren't available yet. So then I thought, what if those facts were available right now? And somebody stood up and shared them.
I feel very exposed right now next to you, Liane. I feel like you could look around this room and start unspooling some story about all of our fates. But this does make me wonder: how do you know and how do you feel when a subject is worth pursuing as a novel?
I know if I can't stop thinking about it, which was the case for this one. So it was just stayed in my mind over the following days.
Well, so Here One Moment charts, the fates of 6 of the passengers in particular and the so-called Death Lady. I really don't want to spoil too much about it. But you switch between their points of view, and you've done that in the past, obviously, with your novels. Let's just start with talking about when you write a multi-perspective story. Who do you begin with? How do you choose who's going to be your star?
I don't know. I just start. I do always think next time I'm going to write a novel from one character's perspective and just stay with that character. And every single time I think that, then I write 9 Perfect Strangers. Or now I've written a book with a whole plane load of passengers. And I was speaking to the author Karen Joy Fowler, and she was saying that she thinks every author has a desire to write the novel they're incapable of writing, and that seems to be the case for me.
Next thing you know, you're going to be writing, I don't know, about a whole apartment building full of characters.
Yes, I know.
So, this is a similar question, but when you have a plane load of people you could write about, how do you, what is your North Star for figuring out which 6? Which 9 strangers?
Well, I didn't start with the whole plane load and then like Cherry, who's the character in the book who points at each passenger. So I didn't myself have the plane load and then point. I thought who would be 6 interesting characters, and obviously those are the characters whose cause of death or whose age of death is imminent. Because if you're told you're going to live to 100, well then I think you just go about living your life. But if you're told you're going to die in a workplace accident, the question is, do you stop going to work? So that's why the book then became really about fate and how can you avoid your own fate.
Speaking of the workplace accident, the character who gets that prediction, his name is Leo. And I imagine writing from his perspective is very different, for instance, from writing, Cherry's perspective. Did you find any character more challenging than the others or daunting to understand?
Well, probably not so much Leo. So Leo is a civil engineer, and it's very easy to find out. All you need to do is Google what's the hardest thing about being a civil engineer, and then you have discussion boards of all people complaining to each other, and you get all this wonderful information. So I'm trying to... Oh, I did have... For this one, I had a flight attendant, so that was tricky because I didn't know anything about being a flight attendant. So I just found a friend's daughter who could just tell me all stories about how hard it is to stand facing backwards and doing the safety talk, and how the first time she did it, she lost her balance and fell into a passenger's lap.
Not very safe.
No, that's right.
On the flip side, I'm curious, was there someone that you kept returning to and you were so excited to write more from their perspective that you found that maybe you were making them the one star of the show?
No, because I love them all. No, and I think that's part of the reason why I have different characters. I enjoy swapping to each character.
Makes sense. Well, so Here One Moment is your 10th novel. Did the process for this feel, significantly different from your previous work in any way? I know you start every novel by getting a new notebook. You need to make sure that it's, bespoke and it's proper for this. But yeah, did anything unexpected happen as you worked on this?
No, I don't think so. So my process has been the same. So I'm not a planner. So I'll tell you my Maserati story, which is that my husband became very supportive of my career when he found out that Marion Keyes apparently bought her husband a Maserati. And so he was once at a dinner party and he was asked by the person sitting next to him, so I wasn't there, and he was asked, so how does she go about writing a novel? What is her process? And he, who had never once asked me how I went about writing a novel, apparently spoke at some length about my process and said that she does a chapter-by-chapter plan, she lays it all out, she has a spreadsheet. And when he came home, he told me this, and I said, "But I don't plan at all." And he said, "Well, I think you should." And he said, I think I would get my Maserati faster if you started planning out your novels. But no, so for each of them, I've always just started with the premise. There are things like The Husband's Secret, where the premise was somebody finds a letter to be opened in the event of her husband's death and he's still alive, and she stumbles upon this letter. I did know what was in the letter, and of course I knew that she was going to open it because otherwise there'll be no novel. But I didn't know anything else about the implications. And with this one, I knew that she would hand out these predictions, but I didn't know what the ramifications of that would be.
I've read before that often you will write 2/3 of a novel and you still don't quite know how it ends. So that it sounds like that occurred here.
That's true. So well, that's at the point where I come to the ending. So I always know the exact intersection in Sydney where I worked out how the various storylines for The Husband's Secret came together, which is why when I saw a review which said The Husband's Secret, the ending was predictable, I thought, well, aren't you clever? Because I didn't. I took all that time to try and work out how it would come together, and it's a glorious feeling when I finally see how it's going to end.
I want to ask a little bit about the pacing of this novel. I am curious if anybody has already read it. Yes, I'm seeing some nodding heads. Okay, then this question will make sense. So as you toggle among all of these perspectives, it is more patient with the mystery than you might expect going in. You know, we dive into Cherry's history, we dive into these characters' minds. It's almost like you're insisting on their humanity and not just making us think about whether they're going to die the way that Cherry predicted. We don't even learn Cherry's name until 100 pages in, so FYI. But you know, how do you settle on a pace? You know, that's a bit of an abstract question, but do you think about that when you're thinking about the premise? At what point do you figure out how quickly you should be moving the story along, or how slowly?
Well, I guess it's just instinct. And I guess readers of really traditional thrillers would get a bit impatient with me. So my husband says, if he's talking to the children, he says, "This is what your mother does. She just sits at the computer and goes, tappity, tappity, tap, feelings, feelings, feelings." So I do have a lot more, if it's not a completely plot-driven book. So that's why, yeah, if that's what you want, you're probably going to start flicking the pages to find out what's going to happen. And in Truly Madly Guilty, I took far too long to tell you what happened at the barbecue. I'm very sorry. So it is tricky. It's tricky getting that that balance right.
Are there any other novels that you feel like if you had another stab at it, well, yeah, not to use such violent language.
Oh, I do feel as I'm getting older, then sometimes I look back at the characters of my age now that I wrote when I was in my 30s, that the 50-year-old characters I might write a bit differently now. Yeah, apart from, I don't know. Now I'm thinking. But there are always things, you know, you just said something before, because, and I was thinking, oh no, I would have put that in the novel if I still could. So it's an annoying thing once you've finished a novel, because you're still in that frame of mind of thinking. So anything to do with psychics, now that people tell me, I would have wanted to put it in.
I'm honored, and to explain a little bit, we were talking about our experiences with psychics backstage, and I was telling Liane about one I had gone to who made a prediction that I totally disbelieved, and years later it did come true, but then I still kind of disbelieved because it's a really common prediction. On that note, though, I would love to know a little bit more about your research process for this, because to my mind, you were on a plane and you just started making stories for everybody around you. But yeah, did you go to psychics? Did you head into discussion boards for every profession?
So I did go see a psychic. The thing is, when I went in, I could see that she clocked me immediately, and she thought, okay, I've got this one. She's a middle-aged woman and her children are probably leaving home, and she's thinking, so what's next? Because she was saying things like, so you're thinking, what about me? I've done everything all my life for others. What about me? And I was thinking, no, it's really always been about me. So that wasn't quite right. And then she said, so what do you do for a living? And I said I was an author. And she said, well, you'll probably do okay with your writing. And she said, maybe don't change what you're writing about. Maybe you could think about changing the way you market your books. You could sell them on eBay or something like that. So I was sort of laughing at that, but interestingly, the other night at an event, a woman came up in the signing line and she had a first edition hardcover copy of one of my previous novels, and she said she got it on eBay. So there you go. The only other thing she said was, your daughter is somebody who likes the finer things in life. And I have a 14-year-old daughter who does like whatever TikTok tells her to like, and the finer things. But when I went home and told her that, she said, "Oh, Mum, who doesn't like the finer things in life?" So no, I'm ready to believe, and I'm ready to believe in anything mystical. So after I lost my dad, like many people, we started looking for butterflies. I think a lot of people do that when you see a butterfly and thinking, so that means he's here. And so on the anniversary of his death, as I was walking out to the car, 2 butterflies came, and they were literally flying right at me and sort of stroking my cheeks. So it did feel very special. And then there was another time when I was walking the dog, and there was a butterfly coming along with us, and I was thinking, and it was a beautiful day, and I was thinking, here's Dad coming along for the walk with us. And then my chocolate Labrador went and ate the butterfly. So ate Dad, which my dad would have loved that story. But I guess what I'm saying is I try to walk that line between the butterfly stroking my cheek and the Labrador eating the butterfly, so I'm somewhere in the middle.
Were you always somewhere in the middle, or did you, in the process of writing this book, start wavering in one direction or the other?
Yeah, maybe I started to waver a little away from the skeptical side, just because even in that waiting room with that fortune teller, there were so many people there who regularly make it part of their lives, and people telling me amazing stories. But at the same time, I'm thinking, and I've read about the techniques they use, how they use cold reading and hot reading. So they look at you for clues, just like that woman was looking at me, thinking, what can I see? What can I? And what will I? They ask questions and they start to lead you in a certain way.
How did writing this affect you, and just in your perspective on, how long we live, or premonitions in particular? Because something that struck me about the book is the way you observe how all of us have dreams. We wouldn't necessarily call them premonitions or doubts, and it's a way to defend ourselves against the future, but also to try to predict where we'll go. We all have them. Yeah. So how did maybe just your perspective on the way we try to game our fate change as you wrote?
I do remember just thinking one day, because I was doing a lot of reading about determinism, and which is the idea that everything that happens was going to happen anyway, because everything is caused by something else. And so a true determinist does not believe in free will, and does not think that anybody murderers were always going to murder because of their genetic disposition, because of their childhood. But no, I don't believe that. And I can remember thinking one day, actually, I don't think anything's set in stone about my future. And it's hard to argue with people about this, because people who say everything is fate and everything happens for a reason, well, whatever happens, they say it happened. It was always going to happen. So that you can't argue with that person. But I can remember thinking, so even if there is something in me right now, some disease that is going to kill me one day, there might be a lovely young person who's just this moment trying to decide between 2 courses, and they're about to decide, I'm going to do this particular course, and they'll be the researcher who discovers the cure. So I just feel like anything can happen.
Absolutely.
I'm not a determinist.
You look both ways when you cross the street.
And I look both ways when I cross, and you all do. So you don't really believe anything that's going to happen.
So to go back to, the idea of putting your books on eBay, your books, of course, have sold more than 20 million copies, all of which have been optioned or become TV series that I'm sure a lot of folks here have watched. Did these adaptations affect your writing process at all? And by that I mean, do you think about your stories in a more cinematic manner, or, start picturing Nicole Kidman in one of the roles?
So I'm really not casting as I go. And I know with Nine Perfect Strangers, I can remember somebody saying, oh, she wrote it with an eye on the screen. But I had the characters were at a silent retreat. So there was no dialogue for pages on end, and it was all internal monologues. And I often have characters thinking one thing and doing something else. So that's that's the challenge for any potential adaptation. And for me, the adaptations are not the end goal. So they're not just a point along the way. The novel is not just a point along the way to a final adaptation. And see, I've come to realise that that every single reader has a slightly different experience of reading my books, because readers come up to me and they say something about the book and they get it a tiny bit wrong, and I know because I wrote the book. But I've come to realise it's something from their own imagination, so they might be a beach, and they're thinking of a beach from their own childhood. And so that's what I love about it, that every single reader, it's their imagination working with my imagination. So the adaptations have been a wonderful perk of the job, because I've got to visit film sets and have a lot of fun, but I'm not thinking. The one exception to that is that I did notice that the actors all, they create characters in the same way that I create characters, in that they have to build on, they obviously look at people around them. So I remember that, noticing the way Meryl Streep, she in her role as Mary Louise, she had a necklace and she kept putting it to her lips. And so I just remember writing down, don't forget gestures, just as a way of improving my own writing. And of course, good writing should be cinematic anyway.
I really like that your work is the source material for the adaptation, but the adaptation can also kind of be the source material for your work.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
On that note, just a few more questions before we turn to audience questions. You'd really want to know, Nicole Kidman has said that they are working on Big Little Lies Season 3, and that you're working on the book. Can you share any updates?
Well, I can share that it's true that I am writing a sequel to Big Little Lies, so to the book. So when I wrote the first one, my children were very little, and now they're teenagers, so they're providing lots of teen material. So I have to remember, because it's a sequel to the book, I have to remember things that weren't, for example, in the adaptation. So there was a character, Fred, who I'd completely forgotten about when I picked up the book. So Madeline had another child. So I was thinking maybe I'll be sort of meta and have Fred never come out of his bedroom, and he's just playing video games all day. And somebody says, oh, it's just like Fred never existed, isn't it? So I have to work out challenges like that.
I am curious about how you keep the two separate. You're obviously, this is still your book, your story, but not everybody, but the show is popular.
Yes.
Second season.
Yeah, so I have to write with I'm writing it in an Australian accent. So I did, when I wrote a sort of treatment for season 2 of Big Little Lies, but I wrote that in an American accent, not to be published. So this, I've got to put Nicole Kidman's Celeste out of my mind and just write my own sequel. And then if it happens, then they can do as they will.
Well, then before we turn to the Q&A, just one more question from me. In Here One Moment, right? Some passengers want to hear the predictions for their death, and then the age and the cause, and then some just really don't want to know. What would you do in that situation if Cherry were here right now?
Well, I realise that some people actually do face that, in that some people have to get genetic testing to see if they have a family disorder. And I know people have different reactions to that, and I think I would want to know. So, yeah, I would say yes, tell me. But I would do then what all the, because I think that's what happens if even if you get a terminal diagnosis, the first thing you say is, I don't believe you. The next thing you say is, I want a second opinion. And then you say, oh, I want to try a different treatment. I want to enrol in a clinical trial. So then, exactly like the passengers, I would do whatever I could to fight that fate.
That makes sense. I would just hope that, it's someone with better bedside manner than Cherry. So we're going to open it up to the audience Q&A. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and we have a mic that we will give you. Oh, I see one.
Hi. I obviously you're very skilled with character development, and so I'm curious if you have a system where you're writing extensive backstories for each of your characters, or if you just sort of like loosely have in your head what the positive and negative traits are of each character.
No, so I know some authors like to have an entire backstory. In the same way, I think that some actors really go deep, and other actors are more loose. So I guess I'm whatever the opposite to being a method actor is. So I often start with some attributes. So I've never stolen a whole personality from somebody I know, but I can remember with the character of Madeline for Big Little Lies writing down perpetually outraged, like so-and-so, and a shimmery, sparkly girl, like so-and-so. And then I just combined those two attributes and started writing her, and then she came to life and became her own person just in the process of writing. But yeah, I know I never want to do. I can remember write down everything that they would have in their handbag, and it's just really boring. I don't want to do that. So I told the shimmery, sparkly friend that Madeline was slightly based on her, but I never told the perpetually outraged friend. She would have been outraged.
That's a good call. Another?
Hi. So you said you're not really a planner. So when you start something, do you kind of just write the story as a very short, linear thing and then go back and start fleshing it all out? And once you start doing that and it grows and gets bigger, how do you mentally keep track of everything that's happening everywhere to make it all make sense when you're done?
So I do write in a linear fashion, but not in a shorter. I'm pretending that I'm writing the whole thing from start to finish, as if it was all falling perfectly into place. But of course, that doesn't happen. It's because I'm constantly thinking the whole time that I'm writing, maybe this is going to happen, maybe that's going to happen. And I also need to have a separate document called Things I Need to Fix, because as I'm working it out, there will be things. So, for example, in Apples Never Fall, I can remember that it became important that the character of Stan did not own a cell phone. But as I was writing, I remembered that in the very first chapter, he's lying in bed looking at his phone. So the first thing on Things I Need to Fix was take Stan's phone away from him. And then as I'm working it out, there are things where then I will go back and put the red herrings in, and then I'll go back and put clues, or I'll even, once I get to know a character better, then I think, oh, actually, she wouldn't have responded this way, so then I'll fix that. But I actually hold off writing the last few lines of the book until I've finished the things I need to fix. document because I like to pretend that, as if I was on a typewriter, and I like to write the end, and that really is the end, even though the words "the end" don't appear in the book.
In the front. Oh, back. Hi. So all of your books are obviously a mystery of some sort, but all of them, there just seems like a lot of variety in the type of mystery that it is. So, authors who just like write murder mysteries, I feel like all they have to think about is like, oh, this person died in different ways. But you have just such a wide range of like little mysteries that you're trying to uncover in your novels. I'm wondering how you get these ideas, and I'm also curious like how often you get these ideas, and then how many of those little ideas actually turn into a novel versus how many ideas do you have for a mystery that never really go anywhere?
I'm trying to think how many. There are often a few. I can remember I had an idea about a novel about reincarnation, and I actually for that one, I did have more than usual. I had a little bit of an idea of more of the plot than usual, and my editor actually asked, "What are you writing?" And I excitedly told her the plot, and she said, "Well, that's not going to work because I've just bought a book with such a similar premise. It was uncanny, and if I had gone ahead and written that book, then whoever went first would have thought the other one plagiarised the other one," which was really interesting to me. I think Elizabeth Gilbert said a similar thing happened with Anne Patchett, though, and she has a theory that it's all out there in the universe and all the ideas. I think it's more likely that you accidentally steal something from an episode of Law and Order. I don't know. But I do. So she finished her book and I read her acknowledgements, and we'd both read the same non-fiction book. So I think that any fiction writer who read that book would have come up with a similar plot. Sorry, I went off track there. So ideas come from wherever. So for example, with What Alice Forgot, I read a story about a woman in the UK who lost 10 years of her memory. She lost far more than that. She was a middle-aged woman and she thought she was a teenager. And so she did not recognise her own children. And what I found so fascinating about that was that she was like a teenager. So she wasn't particularly interested in meeting her children. So she'd gone back. So I realised that losing your memory is like a form of time travel because you go back to the person you once were. So often, reading articles and things like that, which Law and Order does too. I think they take a lot from the news.
It's pressure. I almost forgot how I was going to say it. But how hard is it to relinquish control of this book you have come up with, birthed, developed, sold, and then when it goes to the development stage and Fred gets told to, hit the road, how difficult is that? Or is it just part of it and you're just very easygoing about all of that?
Well, I sort of made a deliberate decision not to get very involved. I do always remember seeing the very first scene of Big Little Lies and seeing Madeline, she trips and hurts her ankle. And in my mind, the way that, because I'm always rolling my ankle, so in my mind, the ankles flips this way. But Reese, playing that role, she fell forward. So if I was watching that, I could have said, well, this is the way you're meant to flip your ankle. It's meant to be like this. But it was of no consequence to, and I feel like if I started to get involved, then I'd hold on too tightly. And I do think changes have to be made. And I probably would have said, no, Fred has to stay. But I think if an adaptation is too faithful, it's a mistake. So I prefer step back, and there are some changes that I actually really enjoyed. Like I felt the outfit they chose for Madeline to wear to the school trivia night was actually better than what I chose. So the wardrobe person chose that outfit. And sometimes it's tricky, and you might wish that they didn't change things. But as I say, I think it's better to just stay on the sidelines and enjoy being there, and what will be will be.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier that you wish you could, maybe develop female characters of 50 plus that you wrote years ago. I wonder if you can expand a little bit more on that.
Yes, so thinking that I maybe hadn't got that character quite right. I'm trying to think. So it was a character in my second novel, The Last Anniversary, and I feel like I just made her a bit too old lady-ish. I thought then that when you're in your 50s, you're like an old lady. But I don't know. I don't actually know if a reader would have thought that. But as I was reading it, I was thinking, I can remember writing this, and in fact I do that when I'm reading myself. If I reread a book that I once loved, and I can remember reading it the first time when I was younger, and I was far more invested in the younger characters, and now you're suddenly seeing it from the mother's point of view. So it was just a similar feeling as I looked at that character. So I'm just very aware of. And when I was younger, reading about older characters, there was in good books, I remember thinking, oh, that's such a relief that you're still a person when you're in your 50s. And so I just want to be aware of that as I'm writing, that you're still a person when I suspect you're still a person the whole way. You're still you.
Anybody else? Oh.
When you've created a character that you have decided is unlikable, is it harder to write their part of the book because now you're spending time with someone you don't like?
I think I like all of them, actually. So they might have flaws, but I find something to like in them. So even the bad characters that I might be going to kill off, I still find something to like, or nobody's completely unlikable. And I guess the more interesting characters are those ones who do bad things but are very charismatic. So yeah, I know I haven't had that.
Anybody else? Do you begin from a place of making sure that the character you're writing is redeemable in some way?
No, possibly. I'm not sure. I don't know. I've never written a serial killer who's just completely evil, and I suspect even if I did, I would try to find something about. Yeah, I don't know, but I don't make a conscious decision to do that.
Just doing one more call for questions from the audience. Then I do, one last question to wrap up for you, Liane, is, I read that your initial motivation to write a book was when your sister was getting published. What's your motivation now for writing?
What is my motivation now? Yeah, because a younger journalist once said to me, and she seemed genuinely curious. She said, "Why do you keep doing it? As if I should just retire now." I think she did think, she seems like she's old enough, she could just stop. So my motivation now is just the lovely things that people say to me in the signing lines, and the feeling of seeing somebody reading my book, which is something that never gets old. From the very first time it happened when I was on a Sydney ferry and the person sitting next to me pulled out a copy of Three Wishes, and I sat there the whole time looking down, and I could see the page, and I was thinking, that's pretty funny. And then I was looking up at her face and thinking, is she laughing? And then she got up and walked away because I was obviously behaving quite strangely. But that has yeah, and seeing somebody on a plane reading my book and people coming up, the things people say. Somebody said the other night that she got out of a long marriage because after reading Big Little Lies, so she got herself out of a domestic violence situation. Somebody became a hypnotherapist after reading The Hypnotist's Love Story. Even a lot of people say that my books got them out of a distraction when somebody was sick. Somebody said the other night, she said her son was sick, her baby was very sick, and it was such a relief, and she had one of my books, and then she said, and so it was so good because, I had all that stress, and then I could just go back to my crappy book and read that, and I thought, so I know... And I did think as she walked off, I did wonder if she was thinking, oh my God, did I just say to the author that it was a crappy book? I know what I think she meant. I hope she meant that it was just a distraction, that it was just a light reading. So it gives me great pleasure to write crappy books that will distract people.
On that note, Liane, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you
to Politics and Prose for hosting us. Liane will be signing copies of Here One Moment